everyone. Welcome to our next episode of Chris's Classic Cinema. My name is Chris Wyatt, and this is my good friend.
Hi, I'm Jacob.
So, it's Valentine's Day, but when it comes to the movies we're looking at, they may be considered romances, but they're pretty unorthodox with the title. I mean, they're not like super sappy and all that stuff.
No, it is my goal and mission to rebuttal the fact that these are not romance films, but anything but. In fact, I'm going to be playing the devil's advocate the whole episode, just to throw his game off. I also want to apologize for this. We'll get to this in a second.
Yeah. When it comes to these films, some of them have been around. I mean, they're still popular after so many decades.
Still getting remade even.
Yeah. And the first film we're going for is the one that's been basically remade a couple of times and is still one of the most iconic movies in American cinema. Before Beauty and the Beast, there was the eighth wonder of the world himself, King Kong. A film crew find themselves on an uncharted island, and unfortunately a girl is kidnapped and handed over to a giant 25-foot gorilla named Kong. And next thing you know, she becomes his love interest, and they send him to New York. If any of you know the story, you know how it ends. I mean, this movie has been around for 90 years.
Yeah, 91 years.
I mean, this was around the time when my grandma was like in kindergarten.
Yeah, my great-grandfather, no, my grandfather, born in 36, not even conceived yet.
Yeah. Now, this is a story that's been told countless times. I mean, there have been remakes, there's the Godzilla counterpart.
Yeah, I mean, if we're being honest, the story itself really doesn't need to be gone into too much. Most people will know the story of King Kong, and he summed it up pretty well. You know, they go to Skull Island, they discover the eighth wonder of the world, they bring it back to New York City for show and tell. And
he climbs up the Empire State Building.
And then splat.
And back then, that was the tallest building in the world.
It was the tallest building in the world, and a very controversial time when, you know, the Empire State Building is, this whole movie is very period for its day. You know, like, because leave it to the Americans to discover the eighth wonder of the world, and then also leave it to the Americans to build the tallest skyscraper in the world as well.
And the Empire State Building held that record for about 40 years.
40 years it's held it.
Yeah. With that, let's talk about the cast. We'll talk about the beauty herself, Fay Wray as Ann Darrow.
Mm-hmm.
Now, at first, you can tell that she's sort of like a spunky girl. I mean, she's having trouble getting a job. Next you know, she's offered a job to be an actress in this big movie, but she finds herself on an adventure that beyond her worst nightmares.
Basically, yeah. You know, and much to her credit, even though she's a very spunky and very go happy girl at first, what a set of pipes on her. Just the screams. You know, the screams themselves are legendary to this day. Not at the level Wilhelm, but approaching.
I mean, she was even called the scream queen of her time.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, this does make it a little cliche because she becomes the basic damsel in distress.
Yes, but that was a time when that was not really done before.
Yeah.
You know, she was one of the original damsels in distress, as it were.
And then you have Robert Armstrong as the producer of the film, Carl Denham.
Mm-hmm.
And you can tell that he wants to get this movie done, but you can tell that he also cares about his cast and crew.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
He even has this cool invention of a gas bomb that can take a giant animal out like that.
Mm-hmm.
Then you have Bruce Cabot as his first mate, Jack Driscoll. He falls in love with Anne, and he's willing to do anything to help her when she's in trouble.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have the eighth wonder himself, Kong.
Yeah, Kong. Not played by anybody in particular. In fact, if anybody really was playing Kong, it was probably Willis O'Brien, who was the lead special effects artist for the whole film.
Now, this movie was groundbreaking for its stop motion effects.
Yes, you know, having developed a lot of the techniques were used in like one or two other films.
One example would be the 1925 version of Arthur Conan Doyle's The Lost World that featured dinosaurs.
And the other film technique that was used could also be seen in The Invisible Man. But yes, there were four major different techniques used for those really weird composite stops. Because something that wasn't done before this was stop motion animation with matte screenings and also live action sequences, all in one single shot. And they used four different methods to get that done.
And it still looks amazing almost 90 years late, over 90 years later.
I would say it is showing signs of age because technology has gotten that much better. But considering that they did this all analog, you know, it is incredible. And you know, my favorite, you know, of course, the two processes that are patented are the William process and also the Dunning process. Both used, you know, with the Dunning process using bypacking and color filters. That's how they were able to get it done. They filmed it one sequence with the stop motion with one color filter, and then they were able to run the film through the camera again with the other filter.
Yeah.
That's how it was done with that. The William process was when they had multiple strips of film running through basically a projector, a printer, a composite machine of sorts called an optical printer. And it was basically 3 strips of film being composited into one film in just one go.
Yeah, and when it comes to special effects, I mean, they are basically the stars of the movie.
Oh yeah, yeah, and not just the visual special effects either, but the audio special effects too were the first of its kind.
I mean, when it comes to Kong's roar, it was actually a lion's roar that was recorded backwards, if I recall.
You're half right. It's a lion and tiger mixed together and then played backwards slowly.
Okay.
And that's not the only one that's also, that's not even the most impressive audio special effect. I think the funniest one is Kong's walk. You know, this was done by Spivak, who was the audio engineer of the movie. Spivak was the one that did the stomping effects of Kong. And I kid you not, I wrote this down. This is why I had my phone out, because I had to write this down because I couldn't memorize all this. He stomped across a gravel pit with foam-wrapped plungers strapped to his feet. Just imagine that as Kong's walking and you're nailed it.
Yeah. No wonder. I mean, those shots of him stepping on those people.
Yeah.
I guess that does really add to the realism.
It does.
And then you also have full-size animatronic robotic face of him.
Yeah, you know, it's not animatronic. It is fully mechanical and manually operated. It took several crew members to operate it.
But it's still pretty impressive.
Oh yeah. What's more impressive is the labor of love that went into this film.
Yeah.
Just the T-Rex sequence alone, the epic fight in the midpoint of the movie between Kong and T-Rex took 7 weeks.
And
7 weeks.
And some of the
just for one scene.
And some of the movies were actually inspired by wrestlers of that time.
Yeah, yeah.
And then and when it comes to the other cast members too, I mean, they're pretty good. I mean, you have the captain of the ship, the skipper.
Mm-hmm.
You also have a lot of the crew members. And
oh yeah.
They're all willing to help out to save Anne.
Mm-hmm.
There are some that have aged pretty badly though, especially the Chinese cook.
Yeah, unfortunately, but again, that's par for the time back in the day.
Yeah, and then you have the natives
Mm-hmm.
who kidnap Anne and
sacrifice her to the King Kong.
Yeah, it is definitely has aged a bit.
But the story itself spawned a whole franchise, and it's been redone and done over and over again to the point where there's a lot of modern elements to it that really help clean up the core story.
Yeah, and another thing too about this movie, the music. It was one of the very first films to have an original score composed for the film, courtesy of the famous film composer Max Steiner.
And just to add to that a little bit, it's the first time a 46-piece orchestra was used for the score and a talkie. It was the first full feature-length film like this at this caliber to do that.
And it is, and the music is still pretty good. I mean,
Oh yeah, it was sold. It was actually sold as an original soundtrack for the movie, like a standalone, like proper album.
yeah. And Max Steiner will go on to film other iconic films like Gone with the Wind and Casablanca.
And it's kind of interesting because it's also the first movie to have multi-tracking, as in, and what multi-tracking is, it has multiple audio tracks being used at the same time. It's the first movie of its kind to have 3 separate audio tracks: the music, the dialogue, and the special effects.
Yeah.
Because there was that much to it.
Yeah. And then you have the whole Beauty and the Beast formula for the movie. I mean, it definitely makes sense in a way, but it could. I mean, when it comes to the original guy who came up with the idea, Edgar Wallace, he definitely wanted to do a story that was unlike anything, a Beauty and the Beast story unlike anyone has seen
Yeah.
or read.
Oh yeah. And you know, it was pioneering for its day.
I mean, and it's because of this film. I mean, you can't even look at the Empire State Building in New York without instantly thinking King Kong.
Biplanes and biplanes, yeah. You know, one of the most iconic scenes in cinematic history, been redone and redone over and over again as
Yeah.
parodies. I mean, I think my favorite retelling of this was Cat Kong, which was it's exactly how it sounds. It's King Kong, but instead of a giant gorilla, you have a giant cat, and instead of people, you have mice.
It was written by Dave Pilkey, the guy who did The Adventures of Captain Underpants.
Yeah, it predates Captain Underpants by a few years, actually.
Yeah, but when it comes to this movie in general, it's been remade many times. There was a remake in the '70s that had a guy in a gorilla suit and had Jessica Lange, and unfortunately, instead of the Empire State Building, the climax took place at the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center. So that's
aged. Oh, that's not aged as well either. But there is a version by Peter Jackson that was done very well in the mid 2000s.
Yes, in 2005, the guy who did the Lord of the Rings did a 3-hour epic version of it.
Yes.
And it had an all-star cast. I mean, you had Naomi Watts, Adrian Brody, Jack Black.
Yes, and not only that, but they made it period. They made it take place in the 30s, and they actually brought in all the, well, not the original, a lot of the core original elements from the original movie, they brought in for this movie as a 1930s epic.
And the CGI was groundbreaking at that time, and it earned the film an Oscar.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and when it comes to the original King Kong 2, it was a huge hit at the box office, but surprisingly, it didn't get any Oscar nominations, not even Best Picture.
No, because it invented a genre, didn't it? That movie literally invented a genre of films that
The monster movie.
the monster movies, and so I've always called this more of a creature feature. It's one of the first creature features, you know, because you can't really categorize it as a horror film because it's not really horrifying. Well, it is. But back in the day, it was. But you can't really classify it as a creature feature. I think a lot of people would say it's a gaijin film. It's the original gaijin film.
Yeah, I mean, this was over 20 years before Godzilla.
Yes.
And next thing you know, you have movies with King Kong versus Godzilla, even to this day.
Yes, and then also the robotic counterparts getting into the water as well.
Yeah. Now, all in all, when it comes to this film, it is still iconic. The American Film Institute has placed it on many of their lists. One of the top 100 greatest movies ever made, one of the top 25 greatest film scores of all time, one of the top 100 most thrilling movies, as well as their list of 100 passions.
Yes. So, what is the rating then? I think we're going to both give it pretty high, but what are you going to give it?
I'm giving it a 9 out of 10 because this is...
So, 4.5 out of 5.
Yeah.
Okay. I was going to give it the same rating, 4.5 out of I wasn't going to give it a full 5-star because there are some elements of the movie that are aging quite poorly. Some of the subject matters are not doing too well.
But it's definitely one of those movies you have got to see at least once before you die.
Exactly. And if not that one, if some of the elements make you uncomfortable, at least see the mid-2000s reversion of it.
I've been watching this movie since I was like 12, and I still enjoy it to this day,
as
well as the Peter Jackson version.
Yeah, like if you don't want to watch the original, watch the Peter Jackson version. If you don't want to watch either of them, read Cat Kong the book. That's my recommendation.
Yeah. So that was King Kong. For the next two films, we're going to be looking at films that were produced by the same guy. In this case, who was coincidentally the executive producer of King Kong, David L. Selznick. Mm-hmm. During the 30s, he had his own studio called Selznick International. It famously was the studio responsible for the Gone with the Wind. But we're not looking at that. We're looking at two other films that were very popular for their time. Mm-hmm. The first one was from 1937. Now, this movie has been remade 3 times. I repeat, 3 times. The latest one, back in 2018. But the story is still iconic. The movie, A Star is Born, directed by William Wellman. A farm girl goes to Hollywood to become a celebrity. Next you know, she's falling in love with an alcoholic actor who decides to take her under his wing to make her a star. Unfortunately, as her career goes up, his starts to go down.
Yes, and the roles are kind of reversed towards the end of the movie, aren't they? Where you were right initially, she does eventually take him under her wing for a little bit there.
Yeah. Now, this story has been retold, like I said, 3 times. This is the original. This was the original with Racine native Frederick March and Janet Gaynor. Next you know, in 1954, there's the version with James Mason and Judy Garland. 1976 with Chris Christopherson and Barbra Streisand. And then in 2018 with Bradley Cooper and Lady Gaga.
Yeah.
But that shows how popular this story is. I mean, it's a very simple story, but it also has a huge commentary of what life in Hollywood is.
Yes, I'd say that there is some sense of realism to it. Even though there is some mystifying elements to it, like this one girl happened to be the 1 in 100,000 that happens to make it. The statistics are actually a bit skewed in the wrong direction. It's more like 1 in a million. You know, life in Hollywood, even back then, was extremely cruel to aspiring actors and actresses alike.
Yeah, but you can definitely tell that when it comes to the director and the producer Selznick, they wanted to make this a very romantic movie.
Yes, and there are some pretty interesting elements to it. I'd say out of the 4 movies, this is probably the purest romance film. I can't give it another genre. Maybe comedy, maybe, but
I wouldn't call it comedy. It's straight.
Yeah, I'd say it's raw romance more than anything.
Yeah.
And I only say maybe because there are some comedic, lighthearted elements to it that I kind of enjoyed. And
but it has some very deep themes too. I mean,
yes,
it features alcoholism.
It features not just alcoholism, but mourning of a loss of a loved one after suicide.
And it also goes along with that idea of like both the hope and the reality of the American dream.
Yes.
I mean, think about it. You have this this naive farm girl who thinks that she can become a star in Hollywood. Next you know, she becomes it, but it comes at a price.
Yes, one that her grandmother originally foretold at the beginning of the film. You know, her grandmother, wisely telling her, "Hey, I had to do something similar. Everybody thought I was crazy going out west and making for me and my husband to make make something of ourselves and follow our dream. But we had to make some pretty crucial sacrifices. We had to literally sell our heart and soul to our dream, and that was the cost."
Yeah, and let's talk about the 2 leads, Frederick March and Janet Gaynor. They had some great chemistry.
Oh, fantastic chemistry, and I think that at first the chemistry was a bit touch and go at the beginning of the film. You can definitely tell that she was starstruck initially, but then greatly disappointed that this person that she looked up to in film, when she would travel literally half a day to the nearest movie house to go see him in film, ended up just being this drunk this obnoxious drunk.
Whose career was starting to go down the toilet.
Yeah, there's a little bit of irony in Wisconsinite playing a drunk. I just wanted to put that out there. There's a little irony in that.
Like I said, in case you guys didn't know, Frederick March was born in Racine here in Wisconsin. And he would win 2 Oscars during his career.
Yeah. And there is actually a little bit of, I thought that about halfway through the film the actress was getting noticed by Marsh, I thought that this was going to play, like there was going to be some questions of morality in the film. Because back in the 30s, there was some elements in the movie that were heavily frowned upon. Not only was alcohol, like, portrayed as, like, the bitter enemy, but that wasn't the only thing. Pinball was featured in it, too. Very briefly. And that was something that was actually illegal in most of the country, including Wisconsin.
Yeah.
So I thought this was going to be like a morally questionable movie in a time where it really stood more for what the core morals should be for America.
Yeah, and then when it comes to some of the side characters too, I mean, you have Adolphe Menjo as the producer, Oliver Niles, and he's very supportive.
Oh yeah.
And he definitely cares about his cast, and
oh yeah.
but then you have the guy who's basically the paparazzi, and he's just,
well, yeah, basically. Well, no, he was the paparazzi, but he was also the PR. He was public relations for working under Oliver.
and he wanted to try to get every little detail of their lives as possible, even invading their privacy.
Well, not just that, but when the details weren't juicy enough, would just straight up fabricate it. Like when, of course, when the actress went ahead and, started saying, oh, I'm from North Dakota, my father was a farmer, this guy would just spin up a lie about how
Even changing her name.
Even changing her name.
Yeah, her original name was Esther Blodgett. Next thing you know, they decided to change it to something more attractive, like Vicky Lester.
Vicky Lester, which, back then, much more sinister. I'd say sinister, much more of a sinister name, much more Hollywood, Hollywood friendly. And that was very common even now. Like, a lot of actors and actresses will change their name to
Perfect example, Lady Gaga.
Another example, Johnny Depp.
Yeah. I mean, now when it comes to also the commentary too, I mean, like I said, it can be pretty deep.
Very deep.
It does show like both the ups and downs of Hollywood life at that time.
And it definitely shows the struggles of alcoholism too, where it's literally impossible for you to escape it,
Even going into a sanitarium, it doesn't help.
No, it really doesn't. It's literally a lifelong battle.
I mean, that scene alone of him drunk when Esther's getting her Oscar.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's just heartbreaking seeing him. I mean, he knows that his career is over.
Yes.
And he's basically lashing out at everyone. He's drunkenly lashing out at everyone, saying, I had the worst performance ever. I'm the worst actor ever. And it's right in front of his wife.
Not only that, but it's like, I deserve an award for this. That's the Razzie. That didn't exist till the 70s.
Actually, 1980.
Oh, okay, fine. 1980 on the dot.
Yeah, well, yeah, but then you have, like, Janet Gaynor's character. At first, she was naive, she was innocent, but as the movie progresses, she realizes that this
comes at a grave cost.
It's the whole "be careful what you wish for" thing.
Mm-hmm. There's actually a little bit of a cameo in the movie that I don't think anybody knows, and that's with the Grammy Award itself. That Grammy Award itself was actually originally...
You mean the Oscar?
The Oscar award itself was actually awarded to Janet herself in 1929.
It was the very first Oscar for Best Actress.
And she won it. First one.
And she won it for 3 movies.
She won it for 3 movies, and she used the award, and she actually allowed the movie, like the producing studio, to use her own trophy as a prop in the film.
Yeah.
Which I think is just, like, sublime, really.
Now let's talk about the production, because they wanted it to be a big Hollywood movie.
Oh yeah.
I mean, you have very elaborate sets, very modern.
Oh yeah, I made note of that how modern everything really felt. even by today's standard, especially even the honeymoon scene where they're going on the honeymoon phase where they're driving a car and trailer, that felt the most dated, but not by much. Even now you get a lot of like that's how my parents had their honeymoon. They went out into the wilderness with their car and just made a road trip out of it.
And then you have the color cinematography.
Oh my gosh, yes.
I mean, this was one of the first. This was back then. Technicolor was very expensive to use.
Very expensive.
And there wasn't that many films to use it. In fact, this was like the second Selznick film to use it.
Yeah.
A year before, his first film that did it was another romance called The Garden of Allah.
Yeah, I think we also ourselves have removed earlier colored films as well.
Yeah, and this was, and when it comes to the Technicolor, it really brings Hollywood to life.
It does.
That bygone era.
Well, not even bygone, isn't it? Because some of the elements of Hollywood that was kind of filmed still around, like the Chinese theater,
Or the Hollywood Bowl.
or the Hollywood Walk of Fame.
Well, you mean, well, yeah.
Yeah, because even that was featured, and that was like kind of surprising, and it felt modern. Even the bedroom scenes, it looked like a dated bedroom, but I would say those bedrooms are like straight out of the 70s, not the 30s.
Yeah.
So like they were really modern, and held up really well for many years.
Yeah. Now when it comes to this story, it's just no wonder it's being remade so many times because,
Yes.
Even to this day, it is still, even with the 2018 version with Lady Gaga, it's still a strong commentary of both the price of stardom as well as the consequences of alcoholism.
Yes, and how they go really hand in hand in Hollywood, and they do. Drug addiction is no joke in Hollywood. It's actually been a issue since the 30s, and maybe even earlier than that, even.
Yeah, and also like the rise and fall of stars.
Yes.
Hollywood stars. They only have. Who knows how much longer some of the stars of our generation are going to end up retiring or something like that. Or.
Yeah.
And when it comes to this movie, it was a big hit, and it ended up receiving not many nominations at the Oscars. It was nominated for Best Picture, Best Director, Best Actor, Best Actress, Best Screenplay. It ended up winning 2.
Yeah.
For Best Original Story, which was basically a precursor to Best Original Screenplay, and it received an honorary award for the color cinematography, because back then they didn't have this was before they split categories between black and white and color films.
Mhm.
But this was still when color film was just starting to become a thing.
Yeah.
It really exploded in 1939 with Gone with the Wind and The Wizard of Oz.
Yeah, but even then, black and white was still being done well into the 70s. It wouldn't take full adoption until probably the 1960s.
Yeah, that's right.
So it was about 30. I'd say this movie, the whole story of the movie, everything, is about 30 years ahead of its time, really.
And like I said, it's been remade 3 times. Next thing you know, there's versions with Judy Garland, then there's Barbra Streisand, then there's Lady Gaga.
Yeah, about every 20 to 30 years is a new one. So the next one should be probably in about 20 years. That being said, not my kind of story. I'm going to be giving it a bit of a softer rating. Despite the fact that it's a pretty modern film for what it is, I'm not going to give it the best of ratings. I'm giving it only a 3.5. I don't really like romance films, and alcoholism is a bit of a sensitive subject, at least for me personally. Not because I'm affected by it, because I have close people in my life that are affected by it. So it was kind of a hard movie for me to watch.
I'm giving it 4 stars out of 5.
Okay.
This was for the original, this is really good.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess it all depends like what version you people want to watch. Like I said, there are 3 other versions. Do you want to watch the version with Judy Garland, or it's Barbra Streisand, or Lady Gaga?
Yeah, it literally depends on what generation of actors you want to what generation of actors you want to see, because it really is a generational thing.
Yeah. But when it comes to the original, it is still very solid.
Very, very solid.
Yeah.
holds up very well. I was quite surprised by that.
Yeah. So that was A Star is Born. Now we're going ahead to 1940 with another very unusual romance film. And this was directed by the master of suspense, Alfred Hitchcock.
Mm-hmm.
And like I said, this was produced by the same guy who did A Star is Born and Gone with the Wind, David O. Selznick. And it ended up earning Selznick a second Academy Award for Best Picture, a year right after Gone with the Wind. The film, Rebecca, based on the popular book by Daphne du Maurier. A naive girl marries a socialite and ends up moving into his mansion. Unfortunately, courtesy of a house servant and symbols all over the place, she feels like she's being haunted by her husband's ex-wife.
Yeah, I think it's more accurate to say that she's basically living in the shadow in place of the socialite's former wife. I'd say not ex, but basically, well, yeah, ex-wife, former wife, because she died.
Yeah. Now this was a film I had never seen before, and I really enjoyed it.
Lots of twists and turns, isn't it? It is a ride.
Well, what'd you expect from someone out of Alfred Hitchcock? I mean, look at all the films he's done. Rear Window, Vertigo, North by Northwest, Psycho,
You
The
don't
Birds.
expect it, because this was his American breakout film.
Yes, and
This
before
was
that,
his very first American film.
and before that, he had done many films back in England.
Oh yeah.
But this was the film that put him on the spot of great American directors.
Oh yeah, yeah, and I think sadly that's partly due to the war. Unfortunately, with the war breaking out in Britain a bit sooner than here in the States.
Yes, World War II was starting.
So Alfred Hitchcock, not much work for him to do in wartime Britain. So yeah, coming over to Hollywood was probably the next best thing he could have done.
And to do it under a guy like David O. Selznick, I mean,
Oh yeah.
like I said, this was around the time when he was just about done with Gone with the Wind.
Well, they were actually being produced at the same time, and there was actually a little bit of drama involved in the two movies, and Selznick and Hitchcock. Not much. They actually got along pretty well as friends, as producer and director. It all had to do with the last scene of the movie, the R.
We'll get into that later.
Mm.
Let's talk about the cast first. You have big stars like Laurence Olivier and Joan Fontaine as Mr. and Mrs. De Winter.
Mm-hmm.
You never find out Mrs. De Winter's first name, just like in the original book.
Mm-hmm.
But when it comes to her husband, Maxim, you can tell that he's a guy that has sort of a secret past.
Oh yes.
And then you have Joan Fontaine. She's this very naive girl who somehow instantly falls in love with this millionaire. Next thing you know, she's moved into his house, and next thing you know, she's starting to be psychologically tortured.
Yeah, tormented.
Because she feels like she's in the shadow of his former wife, Rebecca.
Yes. And constantly being teased and bullied by the lead house manager,
The house servant.
the house servant.
Yes.
Teased by her.
Yeah, and when it comes to the house servant, Mrs. Danvers, played by Judith Anderson. Now
Such a chilling role.
she is the kind of woman you would not want to have in your house.
And it's the kind of role that would be replicated time and time again, You see similar characters like that throughout film history, even in The Simpsons. Because there wasn't really a character quite like her before that. This servant of a master who has since passed, basically.
And she's wanting to do everything she can to basically make sure that the memory of his ex-wife is not forgotten. Even making sure that everything in her old room stays as it is.
Perfectly preserved. Do not touch, do not pass go, do not collect $200.
Yes, and then you have other characters too, like there's Mr. De Winter's friend.
Mm-hmm.
Then you have Rebecca's cousin,
Mm-hmm.
who keeps popping up now and again,
Mm-hmm.
played by George Sanders, who we talked about earlier a few episodes ago when we did Samson and Delilah.
Mm-hmm.
and when it comes to this movie in general, I mean, the original book is considered gothic, and this, when it comes to production, it just screams gothic.
Yeah, and the funny thing is, they had to tone it down. Like, that's the code. It's the code of the day. They had to tone it down a little bit here and there. And they actually had to add an extra twist at the end of the film to get around some of the coded rules of film back in the day. One of which was that, and this was a bit of a spoiler, so turn away if you don't want to hear this bit, which is no crime goes unpunished in film. In this case, murder. They got around it by ruling the death as a suicide instead of a murder.
Yeah.
That's how they got around it. That wasn't in the book, but they added that little extra twist of, no, it was terminal cancer. And that was how they got around it. Which I think is just, wait, so you had to add an extra mind-boggling twist in the movie just to get around that? Wow!
Hey, it works in a way.
It worked. It worked in its favor. You know, just it illustrates how much of a genius Hitchcock was back in his day. You know, he was so good at his role in film, and this is what sets him apart from any other director, is that Hitchcock wasn't there to direct a film or tell a story. He was there on behalf of the audience who was going to be watching it later. And if it's one thing Hitchcock knew what to do, and this is going to sound a bit worse than it actually is, it's that he knew how to deliver a climax. He knew how to deliver a climax in a film and give the people what they want. A good climax and a nice bow, a nice ending as well that people can walk away from and go, whoa. You know, that was his game. That was what he did.
The perfect example I can think of is Psycho.
Yeah.
I mean, the shower scene is so iconic. The ending is iconic.
Oh, yeah. You know, if it's one thing that, and this does circle back around to the end of the movie, and yes, there was a point to me going into this, is he was a master of subtlety, which is why at the end of the movie, we get the R silk screened onto a pillowcase. Originally, the producer wanted it to be a smoked shaped little R. Like it was, you know, during the burning of the building, there was the building was on fire and they wanted the smoke to manifest the letter R. But that wasn't subtle enough for Hitchcock's liking. So while the producer was going to finish Gone with the Wind, he actually edited the movie while it was still in the camera to have the silk screen letter R and have that scene done, extra little scene done, to try and get one over on the producer.
Hey, it worked.
It worked in its favor, but also the producer really liked doing... It didn't work and it did work. It didn't work in a way because, what was the producer's name?
David L. Selznick.
It worked. It didn't work because Selznick loved post-production. That was like what he relished in. That was like his bread and butter, was post-production and editing. So it didn't work. But when they screened the movie as a test, they liked it so much they actually rejigged some of the movie specifically to tailor itself around that ending.
Yeah.
You know, so they actually had to do some reshoots and everything.
And when it comes to, when it comes to the main characters, I mean, their chemistry is pretty good.
Oh, fantastic.
I mean, you can tell how much they love each other despite the husband having a dark past.
Mm-hmm.
And even despite all of the psychological torment that she's going through, she's still not giving up on him.
No, especially once all the tangled mess of the story unravels itself and makes itself perfectly clear. You can perfectly see that Maximus is not the guy that is portrayed throughout the movie, and that she herself is no longer naive, but more passionately in love with him than ever.
Yeah, and she doesn't want to be psychologically tormented by the shadow of his former wife.
No, and
she's not gonna let the house servant get to her.
No,
she's not gonna let anyone get in her way.
No,
she is his wife. That's it.
Yep.
The way she stands up to her, I mean, that's like, she's like, I am his wife now. You are gonna do as I say.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But when it comes to the house servant, she's not taking any of that.
No, no. That's sadly one part of the movie that actually did have to get censored out and cut out. Was in the original book, it was heavily hinted at that the servant and the original wife were lovers in the book.
Oh yeah, it's the whole lesbian theory.
Yes, well, less of a theory, more of truth. It was that part of the movie had to not be done because that was illegal to do back then.
Yeah.
They had to basically just leave that part kind of open-ended.
Yeah, well, that does add a bit, though.
It does add another layer to the complexity of it.
Yeah.
Kind of wish it was redone.
Yeah. Now, when it comes to this movie, it was a hit at the box office. It was if I recall on Wikipedia, it was like one of the top 5 highest-grossing films in 1940.
Which is hilarious because originally the movie wasn't going to be done at all. They were having a hard time securing funding from a loan company, and the loan company didn't want to give the money to the producer because they wanted a different cast. They didn't want Hitchcock. They wanted a different cast, but Hitchcock insisted on this specific cast. He knew exactly what he wanted, and it became such a big hit. They were like, "That was great. Do it again."
Now, here's the thing I found out that was actually pretty coincidental.
Mm-hmm.
So, at the time, David O. Selznick was working on Gone with the Wind, but he wanted Laurence Olivier for Rebecca, so he brought him over. But surprisingly, he was actually dating the woman who would play Scarlett O'Hara on Gone with the Wind, Vivien Leigh. So she actually went across the Atlantic to be with her boyfriend.
Yeah.
They were going out at the time.
Yeah.
And next thing you know, David's brother Myron saw her in a movie, and he's like, she should do a screen test for Scarlett.
And got the part.
Exactly.
How about that?
She was able to beat every American woman and actress in Hollywood.
Man, that must have ruffled some feathers. I can't imagine it not ruffling feathers back then.
There's a whole movie that goes along with it called the Scarlett O'Hara War. I recommend you see it at least once.
Future episode?
Maybe.
Okay.
Yeah. All in all, what would you give Rebecca?
Oh, it's a Hitchcock film. There's so many twists and turns in the story that beautifully unravel. You have such a satisfying climax and a beautiful ending, and I absolutely think it's a well-deserved 5 out of 5.
I'm giving it 4.5. I mean, when it comes to this movie, I mean, it's just amazing. I mean,
why are you deducting half a point?
Just because.
It's a perfect film. You're just gonna give it 4.5 out of 5.
Well, personally, I think Rear Window's better.
Okay, there it is.
Yeah, well,
Moving
this
on.
is still a good movie for what it is, and I highly recommend it.
Oh yeah.
And if I recall, I think Netflix tried to do a remake of it in 2020, but that didn't get a lot of love. So that was Rebecca. For our final film, we're going to head to 1951 with another romance movie that's kind of unorthodox, because apparently it's also a World War I film.
Uh-huh.
And it has a great cast too. I mean, you have Humphrey Bogart and Katharine Hepburn. The movie, The African Queen, directed by John Huston.
Mm-hmm.
At the start of World War I in Eastern Africa, a missionary decides to go on a journey with a captain to torpedo a German boat.
Yes.
And they only have so much material they can actually have to do a do-it-yourself torpedo.
Mm-hmm.
And the titular boat, the African Queen, it gets them through to their journey, and they end up falling in love.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this movie I really enjoyed. I didn't expect it to be this good.
I'm the opposite. I think the movie's okay. I wasn't a huge fan of it personally. It just is not my cup of tea, unfortunately. I'm not huge into romance movies, and I felt that this one was a bit too... It's not slow by any stretch of the imagination. You know, I think the movie definitely has some elements to it that are quite invigorating. Like the rapid scenes are very, very good. That uses a model of the African Queen, because otherwise it was deemed too dangerous.
I can't argue with that.
And there was a lot of effort and realism that was put into the movie as well. For example, the majority of the filming was actually done in Africa. It was done in, I believe it was done in Uganda as well as the Congos.
Yeah, and the thing is, the movie's supposed to take place in modern day Tanzania,
Yeah.
which is in Eastern Africa.
Uh-huh. Mm-hmm.
But coincidentally, but ironically, the Congo is actually on the western side of the continent.
Yeah, but it works. It works. They were trying to get some really good jungle shots that I think work really well.
Yeah. Now, when it comes to the main cast, I mean, Katharine Hepburn and Humphrey Bogart, man, their chemistry was so good.
It was really, really good. Of course, you've got it's basically the trope of one character that's really grizzled and very unrefined, and then you got this really, this really proper missionary that's, quite highly intelligent and a bit of a socialite of sorts, and you could tell that she's smarter than she leads on. At first, she kind of plays the role of just not a damsel, but just a woman who just wants to go from point A to point B to get away from the war, basically. Just back to safety, where he's just kind of just this grizzled man that doesn't want to put up with any BS.
Yeah, well, there's also most of the movie is just those two. The only other side characters are mainly her. In the first part, there's there's the missionary's brother who dies after seeing everything he built be destroyed.
By the Germans. And then, of course, there's the German soldiers themselves.
And they're basically the bad guys in the movie.
Mm-hmm.
And
that's it.
Yeah, those are the only characters. Most of the movie is just Hepburn and Bogart.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But they really work out really well. And when it comes to this movie, it actually earned Humphrey Bogart his only Oscar for Best Actor.
Which is criminal in its own right.
I mean, think about it. I mean, there are so many other iconic roles he has, especially Casablanca.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and he didn't even win Best Actor for that.
No.
And then when Katharine Hepburn, I mean, she was nominated for Best Actress for this movie, but she lost.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But still, and then you have the boat itself, the African Queen. And
oh, yeah.
It is a nice little boat.
It's a nice little boat. Still kicking, still going around.
That is true. You can actually see the boat in person at Key Largo, Florida. Apparently, it's also part of the U.S. National Registry of Historic Places.
That's not the only boat in the film that survived. There's one other. Well, it's not the boat that the German warship that the boat that the German warship was based off of and modeled after.
Yeah.
The ship itself was actually just a tugboat, and that of course went out of the service after a while, as most boats do. But the ship that it was modeled after is still going.
Where?
I believe the British have it.
Hmm. Well, if you want to see the African Queen, like I said, you can go down to Key Largo, Florida. You can even take a cruise on it.
Yeah. There's actually, we talk about the British a little bit. There's actually a little bit of drama involved. I'm always into the dramas of films being made, aren't I?
Yeah, I found out that a lot of the cast and crew got really sick during the making of this movie.
Except Bogart and except
John Huston.
John Huston, because they didn't drink the local water. They drank whiskey. No, that is literally what they said. That is a telling of it, is they were drinking whiskey instead of the local water.
Even Hepburn wrote an entire autobiography about her experience in the movie.
Oh yeah, she had in the scene where she's playing the organ, she off camera, just out of sight, there's a puke bucket for her to just, in between takes, sorry for the motion there. If you ate lunch and that made you upset, I am sorry.
Yeah, and she even had, but it just shows how...
That's not even the only bit. That's not even the only bit. Most of the movie, yes, about half the movie was filmed in Africa. The other half was filmed in London.
Well,
because a lot of the underwater scenes and the rapid scenes and all that were deemed too dangerous in Africa. Because we're talking real big, heavy camera equipment, and this sort of thing, you didn't do that.
Yeah, I can definitely tell they used like a blue screen or something for some of the scenes when they're in the rapids, because they don't want anyone to get hurt or even killed.
No. That was a scale model. That was a scale model rapid scene. But yeah, no, the whole movie itself, the whole movie itself was done in a studio near where it's Wharton Hall. That was it. Wharton Hall was where they filmed a lot of the underwater shots and the more complicated scenes that were deemed way too dangerous for the film.
But still, the shots done in Africa are really good.
Very, very good. And in Technicolor.
Yeah, I mean, you actually get to see animals in their natural habitat.
Mm-hmm. And the ship and the tug and the little putt-putt steamboat itself, is so endearing. It's the true
you
hero.
just want to root for that little boat too. Even at the end,
That boat went through everything and just they blew it up.
hey, spoiler alert, at the end the boat did technically save the lives of its captain and the girl.
Did you know that going back to the London bit, that Bogart was originally supposed to have a Cockney accent, but Bogart couldn't be bothered, so they just changed his nationality from
English to Canadian.
Canadian. Because, all right, we see your point. Fine, we'll cheat. You're Canadian now.
Well, I guess it'd be no different than Dick Van Dyke when he did Mary Poppins. No offense.
I'd argue that the difference is that Bogart knew when he overstepped himself and was being, and was like, yeah, no, this British accent's horrible. I'm not doing this.
Yeah.
Dick Van Dyke didn't get that hint. He just rolled with it and didn't care if it was bad.
Yeah, but look how iconic that role is today.
Yeah. Nearly started some wars again, but some old tensions between them.
Yeah, but still, when it comes to the African Queen, I mean, this movie, I just loved it. I even got a few good chuckles out of it. It does have some comedy.
There is some good elements to it.
I mean that whole scene of her dumping all that gin into the river.
Yeah.
Basically, she's like, "You're going to take me there, and you're going to be sober."
No! And I've seen the movie dozens of times, and I could take it or leave it. I don't really care for the theme of it. I don't really care for the whole tropes that it has. But that's not to say it's a bad movie. It's just not a movie I would watch.
I wouldn't mind watching it again, personally, because I thought this was really good.
You're in luck. It's on Tubi all the time. If you have a Roku stick or any other streaming service, it's literally on all the time. It's one of the movies that it's like, you just can't, it's everywhere. You can find it really easily.
Yeah.
It's one of those classic films that just it's super clean as a whistle and just really easy to get a hold of.
Yeah, and it's also, but still, the chemistry between Bogart and Hepburn, I mean, it's just, to me, it's up there with Bogart and Ingrid Bergman in Casablanca.
I'd rather watch Casablanca.
Well, to each their own. I loved Casablanca too, but I loved this movie as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, this movie ended up being a huge hit at the box office.
Oh yeah.
And it received nominations at the Oscars, including Best Director, Best Screenplay, and like I said, Bogart won for Best Actor, and Catherine was nominated for Best Actress.
Yeah.
But she would win 4 during her whole career, and no actress has beaten her yet. Not even Meryl Streep.
Not yet. Give it time.
Yeah, and when it comes to the American Film Institute, they named this film as one of the top 100 greatest movies ever, and their list of top 100 passions.
Okay.
Yeah, and like I said, the boat is still around. If you go down to Florida to Key Largo, you can get a cruise on it for like an hour and a half.
Mm-hmm.
Have like a little dinner cruise.
I don't see where you would have the dinner cruise. That's a pretty small boat, Bat.
It's 30 feet long. That's not that. It's not like. I mean, that's a good sized boat.
Yeah, with an engine on it. Most of the boiler is still in the. Half the boat's being taken up by the boiler.
Yeah, I actually found out that when it comes to the boat, it was actually originally built in 1912. So that means the boat was about 40 years old when they used it.
And again, that boat's been through hell and back. that boat's been through stuff. It's one of those movie props that's just been used over and over again. You're wondering, how is this still here?
Yeah.
This shouldn't exist. Overall, rating.
I'm giving this 4.5 out of 5 because I really enjoyed this. I wouldn't mind watching it again.
I've seen this movie a billion times, and honestly, I could take it or leave it. It's a good movie. And I think anybody that wants to watch a romance movie or a World War I movie should do it.
Or any Bogart fan.
Oh yeah, but even so, I'm not a Bogart fan. I'm not huge into romance. I'm giving it a 3 out of 5. But I'd give it a 2.5 if there was stuff I can complain about with the movie. But the only complaints I have are largely just personal complaints, like I don't like the genre and I don't like Bogart that much. So it's
Well,
like
I can't argue with that.
I'm biased against it. So I was going to give it a worse rating regardless.
Well, 3 out of 5 is okay by my book.
I'd say so.
Yeah. So that was the African Queen, and that's the end of our episode. Next episode is going to be our season finale, and we're going to be doing something rather interesting.
Yeah. Do you want to announce it or want me to? It was my idea, but you can go for it.
It's time to light the lights because we're looking at movies courtesy of the Muppets creator, Jim Henson.
Have a good one. Bye.
And yeah, until then, I'm Chris Wyatt.
I'm Jacob.
Thanks for watching this special episode of Chris's Cinema. Have a nice Valentine's Day, and we'll see you next month.
Yeah.
Bye.
See you in spring.